Today, what's happening to Bitcoin? Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics World Notice Post, covering finance and prop news with a distinctively Australian flavour. And I'm joined again by Adrian from Independent Reserve. Hello, Adrian.
It's my pleasure to be here, man.
Appreciate your time. I know it's a busy time for everybody at the moment and a bit chaotic, but I thought it was a really good time to have a conversation around Bitcoin and what's happening because, if you look at what's happened over the last little while, all the markets around the world fell, and many would have thought Bitcoin might have gone the other way, but it didn't. It sort of fell too,
Yep.
dropped to nearly 8,000 Aussie at one stage,
Yep.
and now it's coming up a bit. So I guess two questions: what do you think is happening to the price, and secondly, what's happening with regard to the sales and transaction volumes through your exchange?
Yeah, I mean, it was really interesting to see. I guess a lot of people saw Bitcoin as an uncorrelated asset, but what we saw over the last 2 or 3 weeks is a correlation of about zero point 0.5 with equities, which is, I guess, a lot higher than what a lot of people expected. So I think gold had a correlation of zero point 0.3 and Bitcoin had a correlation of almost twice as much. So I think what that showed is, we went through a liquidity crisis. So basically, people needed to get their hands on as much cash as they could because they were over leveraged. They just needed cash. So all assets experienced a huge sell-off, and I guess cryptocurrencies were not immune. And I think that shows that the money that's now in crypto isn't that different to, I guess, the traditional money that's in equities and other assets. So it was interesting to see that cryptocurrency is not immune, or as immune as a lot of people maybe would have expected, just from the fluctuations in the economy and other markets.
Right. And so did you see higher sale transactions than previously?
Yeah, so I guess from our point of view, from the point of view of an exchange, we probably had our biggest month for about a year. So we had very large volumes, and this was reflected on other exchanges around the world. And we also saw a lot of interest from new customers opening accounts. So yeah, we I guess saw a large boom in our business, and that was largely due to the volatility that we were seeing in the market.
And in terms of the current trajectory, because it looks to be a little stronger now, and I guess it's
Yeah,
mirroring again what's happening with equities. The US was up very strongly overnight. The Australian markets are also up quite strongly. So it does seem to be much more in line with equities. And I guess people originally thought of Bitcoin as a bit of a hedge against the traditional economies and the traditional stocks and
yeah.
shares. But it doesn't seem to be playing out like that.
Look, I agree that's what's happening at the moment. Whether that will continue to happen, I kind of don't think it will. So my expectation is that we're right now experiencing a perfect storm for this whole area. So I mean, there's a halvening that's happening in just over a month, and there's so much quantitative easings happening at the moment that I believe in the long term, and this could be 12 to 18 months, people will really start to seek out a hard asset which can't be arbitrarily inflated, which is what we're, I guess, what we're really experiencing at the moment. But I think right now we're still in a liquidity crisis. But once this ends, I think we'll see the correlation really reduce.
Well, it's quite interesting because there are some really differing views as I read around. There are
Yeah,
some people talking very bullishly about Bitcoin in particular, simply because of the fact that once you get over the halving and everything else, and
yeah,
once things settle
yeah,
down, you've still got this independent, holding of something which is not being in fact impacted directly by central banks. You've got
yeah.
other people who are saying, well, actually, it's been found out, and really, there's not much below the waterline, as it were. And I'm sure the
Mm.
truth is somewhere between those two
It's probably
areas.
somewhere in the middle.
But
Yeah,
well, I don't know. I mean, I've got no way of knowing which end of the spectrum is right, and I guess that's a bit the problem, isn't it? That a lot of it's to do with confidence and expectation and hope,
yeah.
and I guess all markets are like that. But I suspect that Bitcoin, in particular, is going to be perhaps more volatile because it's going to be much more driven by those very divergent expectations.
Yeah, look, I mean, we've experienced a black swan event. I mean, there's no two ways around it. And look, I completely agree with the view that Bitcoin perhaps didn't react the way a lot of people would have expected it to, but I don't think it should be judged by what's happened in the last couple of weeks. And I do think the next 12 months will be very interesting. And my view is that we will see Bitcoin behave a lot more like a store of value, and I think it will start to, really exhibit its own behaviors that will be a lot different to what we would see in other markets.
Yeah, and a couple of other sort of general questions. My understanding is that whilst there was very high transaction volumes through the various exchanges, there weren't any crises. None of the exchanges fell over and none of them disappeared.
Probably were a couple. So there was one day, probably about 3 weeks ago now, where Bitcoin dropped in price by about 50%. I think that was its largest one-day drop since like 2010 or 2011. And a few exchanges did experience a few issues. Independent Reserve did not experience any issues, which was great, but a few exchanges overseas did. And we also saw exchanges that offered margin trading have some issues because they couldn't liquidate the positions that needed to be liquidated ASAP. So we did see a few events like that, but they were very short-lived. So I think there's an exchange in Hong Kong that went down for about an hour, and there was a lot of people asking questions. Did they go down on purpose because they couldn't liquidate? Did they go down because that they were under very heavy load? In the end, they released a statement that they were actually attacked. Apparently, there was a DDoS attack happening at that time. But what the real truth is, I don't really know. But yes, we did see a few issues, but probably not as many as we saw in the last huge boom back in I guess it was almost 3 years ago when exchanges were off and down for weeks. So I think that really shows that the infrastructure in this area has really matured, and a lot of the exchanges have invested a lot in their infrastructure over the last few years, which is why it's a lot more reliable now than it used to be.
Did all the exchanges pretty much march together, or were there arbitrage opportunities?
There were definitely opportunities. So at one point, most exchanges around the world had like a $1,000 spread on Bitcoin. Yeah. This is extremely rare. So when that happens, obviously there are opportunities, but these opportunities, I wouldn't call them arbitrage because arbitrage is a riskless profit. But once exchanges start having problems, then there are risks that maybe you expect an exchange to be up and running, but then it won't be. So I think with great opportunity, there's usually a bit of risk.
Yeah, well, certainly I've had a few people who claimed that they were able to play one off against the other and made quite a significant killing in the process. I guess the people on the other side probably didn't want to communicate the same story. Right? Yeah, but it is interesting. And then the final point I just wanted to touch on, you mentioned the margins, and the point is there are some exchanges that effectively do claim to offer margin-related trading on Bitcoin, and of course with high volatility they are the ones that are really significantly exposed, aren't they?
Yeah, that's right. So I guess for the people at home who are unsure how this works, so when an exchange offers margin trading, they basically run the risk that if they can't liquidate a position, then the exchange actually loses money. So it's important that an exchange monitors its own liquidity and that they have like other pools of liquidity that they can use to liquidate the positions, the open positions on the platform. Otherwise, the exchange could actually lose a lot of money. And I guess in the worst case scenario, the exchange could become insolvent, and that can cause a lot of problems, obviously.
Yeah, and often it's not totally transparent necessarily on all exchanges, precisely the way that the thing works and what marginality is actually being used within it. So I think it pays to ask some quite hard questions. And we said before, this is, a newly emerging sector. There are a number of entities with training wheels still on and still sort of experimenting. So I guess, as we've said before, people should be a little bit cautious. But interesting that, as you say, we've come through quite an interesting, 3 or 4 weeks. And I suspect that the next few weeks will be as interesting as well.
It's a fascinating time. May you live in interesting times.
the old proverb. Yes, somebody used that with me yesterday. It must be the right proverb for the right time. Really appreciate your time today. Thank you for that.
Sure,
and
no worries.
Let's touch base again down the track as things develop.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
Thanks. Cheers.
Thanks very
Bye.
much. Cheers. Bye.